Are you an independent musician feeling overwhelmed by the endless act of juggling creativity, business, and self-care? You're not alone. That's why I created the Artist Mind Map. The Artist Mind Map is a free blueprint designed to help you get clear on the route you need to take to attain your career goals in alignment to your artistic values. This is not just another random PDF page for the forgotten corners of your hard disk. It's a timeless roadmap you can use for decades to come. Think of it as a go-to overview to consult. When you grab your free mind map, you get exclusive access to a masterclass that will take your career to the next level. I use the same methodologies and systems for my high-end paying clients and students. So why am I giving it to you for free? Simple. I want to build a community of artists who can count on each other for safe spaces. Music saved my life. I believe that you have all that it takes to be the artist you were meant to be, if you're willing to put in the work. And more importantly, understanding what that work is. And the Artist Mind Map was designed to help you do exactly that. So if this resonates with you, go to artistmindmap.com and download this resource. artistmindmap.com. In every studio control room that's haunted me, there's a particular moment that changes the fate of a song drastically. The band has often gone home, the takes are in the session, the plugins are working overtime, glowing like a Christmas tree. And then, at some point, someone leans back, usually the sound engineer, squints at the speakers, and says the most terrifying sentence in audio engineering. Your signal-to-noise ratio is off. Technically, most of us in the room will know what that means. Signal is what we wanted to hear. Noise, on the other hand, is everything that could get in the way. So, we do what we can to save what we can. EQ, compress, automate, gate, ride faders, hoping that the salvages result in what we thought the song was about to be. How the rest of that story proceeds, though, is a different one. But what fascinates me in all of this is this. Most musicians seem to understand this concept in the studio quite well, and then walk out of the door to forget completely to apply any of this to their lives. Musicians will obsess over headroom on the snare, but not headroom in our nervous system. We fine-tune gain staging, but let our attention clip all day. We demand clarity from a vocal, but live as if our inner voice is just another track in an overcrowded session of poor musicianship. Signal-to-noise ratio is off. Let's discuss. Welcome to another session solocast. These solocasts were designed to help independent artists and musicians like you navigate the very complex labyrinth that is your artistic practice and career. They're based on empirical research and experiences of my own career as an independent musician and an educator and coach working with artists just like you. The primary aim behind these sessions is to offer accessibility to the kind of education many of us need to work with in order to forward ourselves in these very confusing times as empowered and independent artists in the truest sense of the word. Okay, before we go any further, a quick translation for non-musicians, okay? For those of you who've never recorded music professionally, signal-to-noise ratio isn't your regular, exotic, nerdy studio audio engineering phrase. What it in its essence describes is the strength of what matters, signal, in comparison to what distracts or distorts, noise. A high SNR, or signal-to-noise ratio, means clarity. A low one means confusion. Now, audio engineer or not, we've all felt it while trying to concentrate in chaos or make decisions amidst overwhelm. Signal-to-noise ratio ultimately is a life concept when the meaningful signal becomes audible and life becomes mindful and less reactive, more intentional and less overwhelmed. There's an era of bad music production out there in every sense of the word. We live in a culture that treats information overload as something normal. Now, research across psychology and decision science, if that's a thing, has been warning us for decades. When the amount and diversity of information exceeds our capacity to process it, decision quality drops. Confusion rises, and we take longer to choose while feeling worse about the choices we eventually end up making. More recent work on digital information overload links this directly to stress, but also anxiety levels and eventually even burnout, the dreaded B word. In other words, when noise gets louder than signal, we don't just feel a bit scattered, we literally become less capable of steering our lives well. Cognitive research on noise and performance says something similar in a more literal way. Reviews of auditory noise show that irrelevant sound reliably impairs working memory and complex cognitive tasks. On the emotional side, anxiety has been shown to weaken our ability to inhibit irrelevant stimuli. Whether those distractions are external, notifications, sounds, or internal, worrying thoughts, it doesn't really count. It doesn't really matter as much. Put bluntly, the more anxious and overloaded we are, the easier it is for noise to hijack us. And the harder it is to stay with what actually matters. For you musicians out there, meet the entrepreneurs. Some of you might have actually heard my episode on musicians versus entrepreneurs, the blog post as well. Here's the part that stings a little. A bunch of people saw this coming and built entire careers around protecting their signal, while, ironically, often being major players in generating the very noise we struggle with today. Steve Jobs famously described his approach to creativity and leadership as a battle between signal and noise, with his role being to minimize the noise so the essential signal could emerge. Internally, Apple used the signal to noise ratio, to the best of my knowledge. Don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure this is legit. This metaphor to describe how much meaningful insight a product, meeting, or idea actually contained relative to fluff or distraction. So, the meaningful insight was the signal, the fluff and distraction was the noise. Jobs' obsession with simplicity wasn't aesthetic. It was neurological, existential, from what is word on the streets. The general approach was reduce noise, amplify the signal, and everything becomes possible. Meanwhile, we musicians and artists and generally creative types, the ones who actually work with the literal version of this process, kept absorbing a very different mythology. Romanticizing chaos, glorifying being busy, booked, always on the go, letting hype, not clarity, to determine our priorities. We were taught to say yes to everything for exposure, or for that guy who says, you never know who will be in the room, for the other guy who says, it's only one more gig, just one more collab, one more session, one more platform. You never know who will be in the room. Do it for exposure. We mastered the science of signal, creating art, but not the discipline of protecting its birth in the world. The result is a strange irony. A world where the artist's role could be more important than ever, but with artists being too overwhelmed to hear themselves clearly. Inner signal versus outer noise. From a neuroscience perspective, you can think of your attention as a system that constantly switches between external and internal focus. Recent research is starting to map how the brain toggles between attending to the outside world and to the internal content like memories, imagery, and self-generated thought. That inner space, when you're not reacting to anything, just listening inward, is where most genuine artistic signal arises. The melody that shows up in the shower, the poem that suddenly lands while you're walking, the vision of a painting you know you have to put out there, the uncomfortable, honest thought about where you really want your career to go. Yes, that could be creativity too. But there's a catch. A 2025 review on distraction distinguishes between external distraction, things pulling your attention from outside, and internal distraction, mind wandering, intrusive thoughts, urges to check your phone. Both degrade performance when they're not managed. Now, you might be aware of this on an everyday level anyways, but the actual subconscious implications of this is a whole different thing altogether. At the same time, earlier work by other researchers showed that anxious individuals struggle more to inhibit both external and internal distractions, especially when tasks demand a lot of mental effort. So, we have this delicate instrument, our attention, trying to protect a delicate signal, our inner voice, all the while surrounded by an environment and a nervous system that are both encouraged to generate noise, given incentive to do so as well. So if you don't consciously learn to work with that, build that skill, build that muscle, the mix engineers itself, and it is not in our favor. How does this play out in real life? Some case studies, some legit actual happenings where you'll see this panning out in ways you did not see coming might be career decisions. Signal might be the quiet, consistent knowing that you're better off building a sustainable ecosystem around your work rather than chasing random gig offers across, multiple circles. Noise, in this case, will be the panic that hits when you see other artists posting tour dates and you haven't played out in a while. There's one example. Creative direction. Signal might whisper that the record you actually need to make next is smaller, more intimate, less quote-unquote impressive, but deeply honest because you really need to do this. Noise shouts that now is not the time to take risks. Self-worth, comparison. Signal is the simple, grounded recognition that your worth as an artist is independent of the algorithm's mood this week. Noise is the storyline that every spike or dip in engagement is a verdict on your identity. Then there's relationships and boundaries. Signal is the part of you that knows when a collaboration, client, or mentor dynamic is quietly eroding your integrity. Noise is the chorus of scarcity. What if this was your only shot? So, listening as a radical act is what I recommend there. The point is not to escape noise. Noise is part of the environment. Some of it is even useful, as I'll talk about in a bit. The question, though, is, does noise serve the signal or drown it? I recommend installing a pre-fader. And so before you say yes to a big commitment, sit with the raw feeling of it without external input. Mixing engineers, musicians, producers, songwriters, they know how this works. There's a timeline before which we decide on a final mix of a song or the final master of a song. And until we feel like we're there, and some of us are experts that feel like we're never there, by the way, whole different conversation. But there is a process, there is a timeline. And up until we're ready to let go, up until we're ready to know that, okay, this song is done. And usually the best advice I found on this, by the way, for those of you audio production nerds out there, when you can't think of anything to improve the mix, improve the song, that's when you know the mix is finished. But up until you come to that point, don't say yes to big commitments on a whim. And also consider limiting your channels, pun intended, from both an audio production perspective and a real life metaphor. You don't need less creativity, you need fewer channels for it to bleed into. Design for stretches of undisturbed attention. You don't need an ashram or a temple. You just need pockets of time where your attention is not for sale. Just that could be a good start to change the entire paradigm, for lack of a better term. That word paradigm gets thrown about a bit too often, but I'll just go with it for now. Also, do regular noise audits. Look at your life like a song. Which elements enrich the signal? What mask it? And maybe redefine your tolerance for silence generally. Or redefine the role of silence in your life. Silence is not the absence of music. It's where the song decides whether it wants to visit or not. So, at this point, before we get to kumbaya with the whole thing, we don't live in Disneyland, okay? Here's the twist to the entire metaphor I've used as the center point of today's episode. And this is a twist the metaphor doesn't tell you until you spend a lot of time in a real studio. Sometimes the best producers deliberately add noise to the mix. Wait, what? Isn't that like a complete antithesis to all of what I just said? But here's the thing. That's a different kind of noise. It's not the destructive kind. It's the kind of noise that is designed to enhance contrast. Hear me out. Effects like gentle saturation, harmonic distortion, tape hiss, artifacts that make a sound more vintage. Now, I know for laymen these might be a little nerdy terminologies, but you musicians out there, audio production nerds out there, you know what I'm getting at. So consider using these as a pointer to rethink some aspects to your life. These are effects, the deliberate noise, the designed, curated noise that make a sound feel warmer, more human, more alive. In other words, not all noise was created equally. Sometimes noise is the very thing that makes the signal believable. The question now is, but how? Okay, an illusion many spiritual or philosophical gurus out there try to sell is the fantasy of a frictionless life, like Disneyland. But the beauty of real music, just like real life, lies in the friction. That's the bitter irony of it all, isn't it? Pain, heartbreak, love, hate, and love, despite all of this, rising above all. The irony in all of this is public knowledge at this point in the lives of some of the richest people in the world who went out of their way to engineer worlds free of friction, only to find out more of it through isolation, distorted identity, and the kind of existential flatness that results in a very different brand of poverty. So the takeaway there is, what we're ultimately seeking isn't a pristine, sterile existence. It's connection. But to connect without collapsing into chaos, we have to start with our own signal. The one voice that rings honest underneath the static. When that becomes clear, the connections we form are not compensatory. They're contextual, harmonic, resonant. musical in the deepest sense of the word. In the end, signal-to-noise ratio is not a romantic metaphor. It's actually a brutally practical question. Does our inner voice stand a chance in the environment we've built around it? In the words of the great Carl Jung, fuck around and find out. Sorry, you thought you made it to the end of an entire episode from TL without an F-bomb. Well, this one's on Carl. Fuck around and find out. Mute a few tracks. Pull some faders down. Listen to that song long enough for the truth to come through. And then when it does, have the courage to let it be the loudest thing in the room. Hope that helps.
Hey folks, I hope you found that episode helpful. Here's a little request. If you did, consider sharing this episode with your folks. Think about the ways in which they might benefit the way you did. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have queries. My name's TL. I'm an independent musician and educator and the founder of the Holistic Musician Academy.